Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to day 31 of albums that are 30 years old in 2022. We've been looking back on our favorite albums from 1992 all month long. And as you can probably guess by my guest here in the Zoom, Mr. Mike Portnoy, my favorite album here on day 31, the number one album from 1992, was released July 7th of that year on the Atco label, recorded at Bear Track Studios in Suffern, New York, the Hit Factory in New York City, produced by David Prater. We're talking about Images and Words from Dream Theater.
There it is. I don't know which way it is,
right
the way the people are seeing it, but yeah, there it is. Wow, thank you. Number one. Thank you.
And I do want to show this because I was actually just looking at this booklet before, and it's hard to believe that you guys were ever this young, but I guess we all were, right? And I'm like, wow, everybody looks so different nowadays. We're getting a little glare here, but there you are right there, Mike. So how are you? It's been a couple months since you've been on the show. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Well, number one, that's quite an honor. I appreciate that. And there was a lot of, as you've covered, there was a lot of great stuff that year. I mean, Volker Display of Power and, Faith No More, Alice in Chains, Dirt. I mean, it was a great year for music. But yeah, we stuck out like a sore thumb back then. Back in '92, we came out with this album, and it was, we were a square peg in a round hole for it. But somehow it worked. It clicked. I guess maybe because we were kind of different from what was popular at that time. Maybe that's what helped it stand out. I don't know, but it's an album that changed my life. I wouldn't be here talking to you if that album hadn't clicked the way it had and done as well as it did.
Well, I mean, that's the important thing. I think not only did it change your life and everybody else in the band, I think it changed the lives of a lot of us, because this marked a kind of new style of music that, borrowed from some things of the past, but like really spearheaded a whole generation of bands to follow and albums and music to follow that we still feel today. Not only in your former band and what they're putting out, but the music you've created, all the other bands that kind of came in your wake. I mean, it's hard to deny the importance of this album, and this album was like a little bit of a period of growing up for you guys. Adding a new singer, and the new producer, new record label, getting played on the radio. I mean, Pull Me Under was a big breakthrough for you guys. Can you kind of like take us back to, like, I guess, the time in the studio making this album? Did you have any idea that this was going to be like a deal breaker and a game changer for not only yourselves, but for so many people?
I mean, we were just happy to be given a second chance, or even a third chance to be because James, was our third singer at that point. We had done the first period with Chris Collins, the Majesty era. Then we went through the whole When Dreaming They Unite experience in '88 and '89 with Charlie Dominici. And that was just like nothing but false promises and false starts. We were excited to be making a first record, but then it went nowhere. We never toured for When Dreaming Day Unite. We didn't do any videos. It just never panned out. And that album kind of just fell on its face, and we disappeared for years. So between like '89 and '92, when this came out, we were kind of just we spent a year looking for a new singer. Then we had to spend a lot of time going through all the legal red tape to get ourselves out of the Mechanic deal and then signed to Atco. So we weren't looking at the bigger picture that this is going to change the world and change our lives and open up the whole progressive metal genre. We weren't thinking in terms of broad strokes. And here we are talking about it 30 years later. We were just happy to be making another record and given another chance. And to be honest, even the starting, period of this record, we were still uncertain. We didn't know it was going to take off the way it did, because there was a lot of waiting. We made this record in summer and fall of '91, and making it was difficult. Working with David Prater was a difficult process that's been spoken about and documented elsewhere. So, we had to swallow our pride to get that record done. And once we finished the record and delivered it, we sat on it for 8 months. It wasn't even released till 8 months later in summer of '92. And then even once it came out, we didn't start touring until I think September or October of '92. So we were still gun shy from the When Dreaming They Unite experience. So it was like we were just happy to finally have a new album, new singer. And we were just proud of the music, the music we wrote for this album: Metropolis, Learning to Live, Take the Time, Under a Glass Moon, Pull Me Under, even A Change of Seasons was supposed to have been on this album. You know, we wrote all that music in 89, 90, and 91. And that's what kept us going. We were so proud of this music. We were so excited to have a new singer in the band and a new, you know, that's my lyrics to the first verse of Take the Time was all about that period. We need a new voice, a new law, a new way, you know, take the time, reevaluate. That's where our heads were at. And when it finally came out and we finally hit the road, and then it was all over MTV and all over the radio, it was like, wow, like 7 years of perseverance is finally like paying off. You know, all those false starts, all the bad luck we had for those first 7 years, finally there was the light at the end of the tunnel, and we were up and running. And from there, the rest is history. I mean, that began the next 30 years trajectory for all of us. And like you said, it really opened up the genre again. It kind of breathed new life into the prog genre, which was very dead in 91 and 92. You know, the whole grunge scene had taken over. It wasn't just grunge, but there was also, you know, bands like Jane's Addiction and the Chili Peppers, the Smashing Pumpkins. So it wasn't just Seattle. There was all this other stuff. And we were so tremendously out of step with that it was amazing that this took off the way it did. And we kind of created a monster, because now this genre is blossoming, you know, in each and every direction. But I don't think if Images and Words had succeeded, I don't know if the genre would have moved forward the way it did, because prog was a dirty word at that point, and our commercial success on a mainstream level really opened up all those doors.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I know for me personally, as a big hard rock and metal fan, starting in the late 70s and all throughout the 80s, I know the beginning of the 90s, a lot of things that were happening in popular music were a real turnoff for me. I mean, I really fought hard against grunge and alternative and hip hop and all the new metal that came a bunch of years later.
I loved all that, by the way. I have no problem with any of that stuff, by the way. But it just wasn't what we were doing
at the time. I mean, I've gone back and you know, found some love for some of that stuff all these years later, but at the time I really fought hard against it. So that is kind of what turned me on to bands like yourselves, as well as, you know, Spock's Beard and the Flower Kings and, you know, Ekelin and all these other bands that kind of started to come up from the underground in Prague. But what I loved about you guys is like you had that heavy metal mentality that I love from Rush and Fates Warning and Queensryche, Rainbow, so on and so forth. But you injected these great pop hooks and this ridiculous kind of like prog instrumentation, which I love from bands like Yes and Genesis and King Crimson, so on and so forth. So for me, it was like you guys were the savior for me, because all of a sudden there was something new for me to get excited about. And I no longer lamented the fact that a lot of my heavy metal heroes were trying to do grunge or disappearing into the underground or what have you. So I latched onto this album like it was nobody's business. And even though I had been introduced to the debut, which I really liked, this was like on another level. You know, this was almost like this was your debut. This was your official debut and your kind of coming out party, and then everything else that came afterwards, obviously. So, yeah, so important. I mean, so many, you know, it's so funny because I remember specifically at the time thinking of all these people who were into Dream Theater. And then within like 2-3 years or even less, people like, oh yeah, did you hear that latest Dream Theater clone? Did you hear that Dream Theater clone? And they were all, you know, a lot of great bands, but everybody was like, this is what we want to do. It's almost like you gave everybody the okay to do something like this.
Right. Well, I must give credit where credit's due. You know, I think this album and its commercial success opened up a lot of doors, but we didn't invent this genre. You know, like you mentioned, Fates Warning was doing it before us, and Queensryche, even Iron Maiden and Metallica in the late 80s were dabbling in more proggier stuff, longer songs. But we, I think by 91, 92, even a lot of those bands like Queensryche was getting streamlined a little bit, and Fates Warning was as well. But Fates Warning never really had a major label behind them. And all my, you know, we were just doing what we naturally loved as fans. Like you said, you know, we loved heavy stuff. I loved, you know, what Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax and Megadeth were doing, as well as the classics like Sabbath, Priest, and Maiden and all that. And we were throwing that into a giant melting pot with the prog stuff too, because bands like Genesis and Marillion and Yes, they were, you know, at this point just doing streamlined basic stuff. Even Rush was very, very you know, they got rid of all the complex stuff at this point. So we were just doing what we loved as music fans and kind of threw it into a melting pot, and this is what came out. But you know, certainly there were a lot of bands before us kind of tinkering with it, but luckily the success of this album really helped. And I think if this album hadn't succeeded and it was like When Dream and Day Unite, I don't know if the genre would have ever grown the way it did. I think it was because once the major labels, or even the smaller labels like Magna Carta or Inside Out at the time, once they saw that there was a market for this and how well Images and Words did, that's when all these bands came out of the woodworks. And thank God, you know, because from there it flourished and branched out into so many sub prog genres. And you also mentioned the melodic side. I think it's important because everybody always talks about with Dream Theater and Images and Words and all the, you know, all the older albums, like everyone talks about the prog and the metal, but really there were three sides to us. There was the prog, there was the metal, and then there was the melodic and catchy songs, you know, songs like Another Day and Surrounded. And, you know, even like the chorus from Pull Me Under had a hook. And the melodic side, you know, we loved bands like Journey and U2 just as much as anything else. So we wanted to have that edge as well. We didn't want it to be full on, you know, wankery, you know, or full on bombast. We wanted to have a side too, you know, with songs like Another Day and Surrounded that, you know, Wait for Sleep, where there was a melodic edge to the band as well. And it was those three aspects, I think, that really made up Images and Words and all of the albums that followed.
Yeah. Did you guys ever, you know, you mentioned Change of Seasons before and how that song was also kind of created around the same time. Was there ever a thought to, I mean, I know probably it's career suicide with your second album to release a double album. Was there ever thought of including that in this album at all?
Oh, up until the first day in the studio, A Change of Seasons was supposed to have been on the album. It was supposed to be have been a 9-song album, and it would have been around 75 minutes or so, 70, you know, 78 minutes, whatever. And all the pre-production we had done for this album with David Prater and with Atco Records included A Change of Seasons on this album. And the day we entered Bear Tracks to start recording, we get a call from Derek Oliver at the label saying they're not allowing us to put A Change of Seasons on the album. And we were devastated. We were heartbroken. Like, what a way to start the session. It was such a downer. And for me, it was such an important song. It was my lyrics. I didn't write lyrics to the other stuff on the album because this was my big baby. And to have that big 20-minute epic cut, which was so personal to me, it was particularly heartbreaking for me, but the whole band was really bummed out about it. But in retrospect, I gotta say, I think as much as it hurt at the time, I think in retrospect, the label was right. Because if, you know, no albums back then were 80 minutes long, 75 minutes long. They weren't. So it would have been just too much. It would have been overload for quote unquote a brand new band. You know, it was essentially almost like a debut album for a lot of people. And that could have been suicidal. It could have been just too much to swallow. So in retrospect, as hard as it was at the time, I think it was the right move by the label. And we ended up being able to record it a few years later on its own as an EP. So it worked out in the end, but at the time it was a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think maybe 3, 4, 5 years later it would have been okay because then everybody was releasing 75-minute
right.
singles, right?
But not
time,
then.
Yeah, not quite.
Yeah.
How hard was it, like when you first went out on tour to support this album and the couple of tours after it? How hard was it not to like dip too much into this album? And did you guys ever get to a point years later where you purposefully tried to stay away from Images and Words just a little bit and really explore more of the rest of the catalog?
We never could really get away from this album.
Hard, right?
It was too important. And you know what? It's not only was it important, it's good. The material is great. These are classic songs. How could you not play Pull Me Under or Take the Time or Learning to Live or Metropolis? I mean, Under a Glass Moon, like, it's a classic album, and those songs still stand the test of time today, 30 years later. So yeah, this material was always represented in the set, always, you know, and later on I would write different set lists for every show, but I always made sure, you know, there always had to be Images and Words tunes. But that first tour we did, you know, we pretty much were playing the whole album, and it was more important for us to do some tracks from the first album because we kind of didn't want to forget about that. So the first Images and Words tour was pretty much all of these tunes, as well as like A Fortune in Lies or the It's a Jam, maybe, you know, a couple songs from the first album sprinkled in. And the whole First Images tour, like I remember opening with Metropolis every night, because originally I wanted Metropolis to open side one and Pull Me Under was going to open side two. It was another battle with the label. They really wanted to open side one with Pull Me Under. And once again, I think they were right with that decision. So I, all these years later, I came to grips with this album sequence, but we always opened the live show with Metropolis, which was great on that tour. And it, just like coming out of the gates, everybody, on that first tour was their first time seeing us live,
Yeah,
so
same here,
first time in Philly, first time in Detroit, first time in Chicago, first time in LA, first time in Germany and England, like it was really the big unveiling. And then to come out every night with Metropolis, there was always that look in the audience, like people were like, okay, first they were like, okay, let's see if they could play this stuff. And then halfway through the middle of Metropolis, people are just like, whoa.
Oh, this is the real deal. Yeah, I did the exact same thing. It's like, wow, this is great. Yeah.
And we started in a van. The Images Awards tour, the first 3 months were in a van before radio was playing it, before MTV was playing it. And then about 2 or 3 months in, when radio and MTV got behind it, it was like, boom, suddenly all the shows were sold out. We moved up to a bus and started, going to Europe and all these other places. So yeah, it took a little while to get the ball rolling. People that weren't there at the time don't remember. It took many months for it to come out, many months for it to click, but once it did, it kind of changed everything from that point on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've told you this before, but one of the great things I've always loved about Dream Theater, especially going to see them live, and I'm really mainly talking about when you were in the band, is I've seen every single Dream Theater tour, at least one gig on each tour since this album came out. And what was so great about the band for so many years is like you could go see Dream Theater 2, 3, 4, 5 times on a tour, and you would get a totally different set list every single night. Yeah. And it's, my wife sometimes kids me, she's like, "You going to see Dream Theater again?" And I'm like, well, there's a reason why. Not only do I love the band, but because you're getting a totally different show. It's like going to see a Grateful Dead show, right? You're going to get a different set every single night.
That was my MO.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I was guilty.
I applaud you for that, because that's what made every single concert an event.
I think once we got to the point where we had 4 or 5 albums, 6 albums, and all that material to work with, that was just my MO. I want, pretty much 2000 to 2010, that era. I slaved every night on my computer writing a different set list for every single show, and reviewing whatever we played in Poughkeepsie the last time or whatever we played in New Haven the last time, making sure it's different each and every time. I mean, but it was a lot of work. I understand why the band doesn't do it now without me. I mean, I would have to give a master list of 50 songs at the beginning of each tour, not only to the band members, but to the light guy and the video guy, and each and every day, everything would have to be reprogrammed. So it was a labor of love for me, and I knew the fans appreciated it, but it was a lot of work.
Well, Mike, you have always done everything you do for the fans, because you are a fan. Yeah. And absolutely. And that's why you are always like one of us. And that's the reason why so many folks love Mike Portnoy. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. So as I always do on all these, or have done on all these episodes this month, I do want to give my favorite songs on the album, which is kind of hard because I love them all. I have so much history with them, but my favorite song is Learning to Live. Yeah. It's absolutely spectacular. I love Under a Glass Moon, exciting track. John's solo on that is just absolutely immense. And Metropolis Part 1, I mean, come on, got to be that. But I love them all. They're all great. There's great hooks on this album. That's why one of the things, as much as I love the musicality of all the albums, those hooks are what kind of keep me coming time after time after time after time. So those are some of my favorites. And before we let Mike go, I have to ask him this question. So literally 3 or 4 days or something like that before I saw Dream Theater in New Jersey recently, you were in the audience at the New York City show. I got to ask you, what was that like for you?
It was actually an amazing experience. To be honest, I've dreamt about that moment. I've had dreams about it. Like, oh my God, wouldn't it be weird to see Dream Theater? Like, and I kind of feared it for many years and many tours. I didn't know if I was ready for it. Wasn't sure how it would feel to be watching my old band without me. But I got to tell you, it was a great evening. And it was maybe weird for a few moments when the show started, but after that, I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't as uncomfortable as I had feared it might be.
Right.
And it was really cool. I guess once James actually pointed me out from the stage and brought attention to me, that kind of made it a little weird because I was trying to hide, I was trying to be inconspicuous. And then once he pointed me out, it's like, oh no, here we go. But yeah, it was a cool experience. And I'm at such a good place with all those guys now. It feels so good to be able to go see them and not feel weird, and to be able to hang out with them and be friends with them again. I mean, that's what it's all about. This began, I when Dream Theater began, myself and John Petrucci and John Mayung were 18 years old. We were teenagers
A long
still
time ago.
in college. So it's more than just the music that the fans know. There is so much personal history,
Personal
between us.
relationships. Yeah.
I mean, it's 36 years now. So that's never going to go away. And there was some rough patches after I left the band for a little while, and all the drama on the internet. But luckily, all that has melted away. And now I'm in such a great place with all of them now, and it feels so good to be able to have that. All of our families are friends, and my daughter and John Petrucci's daughter share an apartment together, and my wife and John's wife and John Mayung's wife play together. They played in Mean Street back in the day, and now they're playing
So
together
those connections are always going to be there.
they're always there. But being able to finally break the ice and go see them without me, it took a while to be able to have the balls and the comfort to do it, but it finally happened, and I'm really glad it did.
Yeah, I think I probably can speak for most folks who follow you in the band that when we heard that news and saw the pictures, it made all of us feel really good. And I'm very happy that you guys are at a good place with each other. And I will say, it's now been many, many years. What happened back a dozen years ago happened. And I kind of think everything worked out in the end because, quite frankly, a lot of the music we've gotten from you, if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have gotten it, and the world would be a worse place for it. So I wake up every day thinking, well, we got Sons of Apollo, we got Neil Morse Band, we got Winery Dogs, and all the other things that you've done, and that speaks volumes, I think. So you know what, the world works in mysterious ways, and sometimes things are just meant to be, right?
That's true. Things happen for a reason, and everybody's happy now. And I still get to, I still get to work with John and Jordan. We did LTE 3 last year, and
Yep.
I played on John's solo album. So it's really the best of both worlds now. It just sometimes it takes a little while to get there, but I'm glad we finally got there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Neil Morse Band tour for now is kind of finished, and you're ready to do Transatlantic. You want to talk a little bit about that before we let you go?
Well, Neil Moore's band is not finished. We're the U.S. tour is done.
That's right. There's an extension of it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, thank God, it seems like, knock on wood, that the world is finally getting back to normal. So I'm going to get back to my usual routine of hopscotching bands. So next up for me is Transatlantic in America and Canada, as well as Morse Fest and Cruise to the Edge. So that's Transatlantic finally getting to play off of the Absolute Universe, well over a year after its release. Then after that, NMB goes to Europe. So we got a whole European tour with Neil Morse Band. Then Transatlantic will do our European shows in July. And then I have South American makeup shows with Sons of Apollo in August. And I mean, that's pretty much what's on the calendar at the moment. There's a few other things that I can't talk about just yet, and there's also Winery Dogs activity. We're finishing up that album and look to put that out and get on the road for that as well. So it looks like, finally getting back to normal. And I loved this last quick run I did with NMB. It was just so great to be playing again. And hopefully, knock on wood, all of the stuff I have in the calendar for the rest of the year will go ahead without any problems and hitches, and look forward to getting back out there and seeing everybody again.
Sounds good. Sounds good. When is the Transatlantic New York area show? I forget the dates.
We start, I think, April 15th at the Keswick in Philly, and we don't have a New York proper show. We're playing in Jersey, so it's instead of New York City this time, it's going to be right over the bridge in New Jersey. I think
at the Wellmont.
Yes, exactly.
That's a nice
Montclair.
Yeah.
So so we have Philly. It's only a handful of shows because Transatlantic, it's hard to get all of our schedules aligned. Roy is out with the Flower Kings. Pete's got stuff with Marillion. Me and Neil have NMB. So these are the only dates we could do. We got Philly, Jersey, Montreal, Toronto, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco. So 7 headlining shows in North America. Then Morse Fest, where we'll do 2 nights at Morse Fest, 2 completely different sets, as it always is at Morse Fest. So that's going to be the Transatlantic Extravaganza. 2 nights, 2 different sets, horns, strings, choir, the big, bells and whistles, and then Transatlantic will wrap on Cruise to the Edge for 2 shows on that as well. So yeah, it's going to be great to finally be playing with Transatlantic again. We started that album in 2019, so here we are 3 years later, finally getting to play it live.
That's great. Sounds good. Well, I hope I can make the Jersey show because I think that'll be fun. It's a good.
Yeah, definitely should. Come on down.
Sounds good. So I want to thank Mike Portnoy for sitting in on this episode of albums that are 30 years old in 2022. Number one for me is Images and Words, as you've heard. So stay tuned. Starting tomorrow, we got a whole new monthly program for you, which I will announce tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter. But more importantly, we're here on YouTube all the damn time, right? All the damn time. For Mike Portnoy, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you later on here on Sea Tranquility. Bye-bye.